should you, or is it a good idea to return for patch 8.3? After putting in a few dozen hours into testing this final major patch of the Battle for Azeroth expansion, and playing through the expansion itself this whole time, in this limited and spoiler-free review, I'm going to answer that question to the best of my ability, based on my experiences testing the patch. I just said that. Oh well. And I should probably have an intro. This is a great start. A really, really good start. Thank you. Oh, and the sponsors too. This is turning out to be really organized. Okay, great. To answer the question of should you play 8.3, the short answer is yes. But, and when I mean yes because there are things to do. There's a new raid to finish off the story, and revamped zones to illustrate the threat of the latest big bad, in this case the old god N'Zoth. There's more gear and mounts and pets to collect, and this time around, challenging solo content that is an honest-to-goodness path to meaningful progression. New allied races, armors, and allied race death knights too. There's no question that when it comes to WoW's major patches, except for maybe 6.1, woo, Blizzard knows how to lay down the gauntlet of stuff to do. This is the predictable part of Blizzard that we can safely say that we can count on. But will you have fun? I can't answer that for you. I will tell you about the major components in the patch that I'm familiar with and what I thought of it, and maybe that'll encourage or discourage you to find the answer for yourself. Let's talk about the starting introduction first. I can't help but compare the introduction of patch 8.3 to patch 7.3, the journey to Argus back during the Legion expansion. Going mostly off of memory, 7.3's introductory content took a few weeks to complete, thanks to Blizzard pacing the campaign through mission tables, or just holding back the content, aka time gating. Meanwhile, 8.3's introduction will take only a few hours to complete the first time, while your alts can optionally skip the not-so-rewarding parts of the introduction. The rest of 8.3's season content is going to be unleashed just a week into the patch, so it's pretty fast. That's not to say that 8.3 doesn't tell a robust enough story. It's paced pretty reasonably, taking you from one location to the next and illustrating, through example, what it is that needs to be done because, guess what? You're going to be revisiting the outdoor content in Uldum and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms numerous times over the next however many months. And throughout your first week or two, you'll be introduced to the different assaults that you'll be fighting against, 5 in all, and along with them, a few more short quest lines to fill you in as to why these guys or girls or insectoids are trying to eat your face. It's unfortunate that we're missing an opportunity to really explore the threat of the old gods in a more fleshed out story, as opposed to what we're getting. The final act of an expansion that made an attempt at giving the Battle for Azeroth a double meaning. But the story of Warcraft has been anything but a slow-moving story, and the structure of the world of Warcraft doesn't really acknowledge the notion of a time skip. If some fans had their way, we'd still be fighting the Legion on Argus, or maybe several hundred years would pass so that the story can sort of reset in a way. One thing is for sure though, Blizzard is more than willing to shelve a plot for later use, or to cut it loose. So what does 8.3 add to the game? I should first mention what 8.3 drags with it, not unlike a horse that drags its dead rider along for a few miles before it unceremoniously shakes loose and rolls off the road. That didn't sound as dark when I first wrote that. In an earlier video that made satire of this very patch, I honestly forgot to mention, among other things, the heroic Darkshore Warfront, something that was never made available in the PTR, at least not that I heard of. And yet, I feel like there was very little lost there. Also consider that no new islands were added in this patch, only a vendor to take extra doubloons, so they had a use somewhere. And now we have 2 features that I was, at least at one point, pretty excited about in the original announcement, but now these features already have 1 foot out the door. I'm unhappy with the result, but I am happy to see that Blizzard experiments and continues to try new things. 8.3 doesn't introduce a brand new progression system per se, not like 7.3 brought us the Netherlight Crucible. But I should point out that the Crucible was brought in as sort of as a band-aid to Legion's artifact system that needed a bit more oomph in the last tier of that expansion. Meanwhile, Battle for Azeroth was given the Azerite system back in 8.2, because BFA sort of needed the help earlier on. But Battle for Azeroth is bringing to the table a big change to gear progression with Corrupted Gear, which effectively replaces Titan Forging as the surprise for players who complete repeatable content. A recent interview with Mike Bybee and Steve Denuser sells this corruption as a celebration of player choice. And in practice, they have a pretty good point. In fact, I think they're right. I mean, imagine having all these different pieces of gear with all these values that you can poke and play with to customize your ideal character with crazy procs and just enough corruption that you can deal with the negative effects of wearing said gear. But what they didn't point out was that you had to get the gear first, which takes us back to that familiar feeling of Legion where we farm and farm and farm and hope. A system like this can work great. We've seen it in a lot of games that lets us slot abilities or powers but have to maintain some sort of budget, and this is usually separated from equipment. In the case of WoW though, corruption boons are very much linked to gear, but unfortunately I can't think of a better alternative. I mean, imagine the Legion relic system dropping in 8.3 all of a sudden. And with that, we would need an answer for like loot tables. How would that translate to dungeons and PvP? It would be too big of a disruption for a final patch. It's just coming too late. But I do like systems like this, sort of like how I enjoyed balancing hit and expertise, or having just enough but not too much defense rating. I think I'll have fun with corruption, especially after I can up my resistance, but I'm more looking forward to Shadowlands, because that's going to be the opportunity for Blizzard to create a system like this from the ground up. Let's talk about the daily routine. So your daily routine is going to be, of course, the bread and butter of your overall enjoyment of the patch or heck anything, unless your playstyle affords you the chance to just show up for raid, and that's it. By the way, hi guild, I hope to see you soon. The daily grind has a certain minimum bar to hit. You know what I mean? Like, for example, I could hit every world quest on the map every 8 hours or so to maximize my Paragon box farming, but that's well past the bar. Actions like that are pretty unnecessary. The bar for 8.3's daily content sums up to doing a daily to complete a regular vision, to complete a fill up the bar style world quest once every couple of days, and if you're confident, to clear and progress through your horrific vision, and then there's all the other content that already exists. Extra content to farm for in 8.3 at least would include rares for pets and other cosmetics, among a couple of other things. Reputations don't feel as high of a priority in this patch. Otherwise, the reputation rewards are unfortunately very sparse, which I guess could be good or bad. I don't know. Maybe you don't have to burden yourself with repping up if that's the case. If you're interested in the essences that come from reputations, then okay, you're gonna have a road ahead for you. That said though, I predict that the routine overall is gonna feel pretty relaxed. There are only 2 zones with 8.3 content, with one zone, the Veil, being particularly dense. So you can expect a lot of activity that keeps the world alive, but more importantly, that can help the outdoor content feel a little bit easier. Alright, now on to Horrific Visions. Horrific Visions is, I guess, the next generation of solo instance content in WoW. Previous iterations included Withered Training and the Deaths of Chromie scenario. And in Shadowlands, we're going to enter Torghast, which is going to have a similar flow, but we just don't know what that is yet. Roguelites, which is what Horrific Visions are trying to emulate, they pull me in. I'm like a total sucker for these kinds of games. It may sound unusual for me to say because I'm not a fan of Mythic Plus, which shares a few similarities, but the main draw for me is that Horrific Visions can be either solo or group content. The solo part is obviously what has me excited, by the way. I enjoy having personal goals, many of us do. Whether it's a certain gear level, obtaining cutting edge, a high Raider IO score, whatever your deal, that's cool. For me, it'll be to complete these visions on its highest difficulty, on my own, and preferably before a lot of other people do. Now, contrary to my very existence as a guild leader, and a content creator, and a streamer, I enjoy playing alone. There's a fair likelihood that I won't run visions alongside guildmates in fear that they'll hold me back, or what's more likely, that they'll get me further than I could have on my own. I take content like this and I turn it into my own game, my personal adventure of growth, a hero's story from struggle to triumph. But unlike most roguelites and WoW's earlier iterations, running a horrific vision, which is an activity meant to be littered with failures and botched runs, is gonna require a good bit of work just to get the key needed for each and every entry. That means most players will only be able to enter a vision 2, maybe 3 times a week with some hard work. So this is the final patch of Battle for Azeroth, and as kind of tradition for a final patch, Blizzard tends to be more relaxed on some of its more restrictive systems and put in place a method to kind of break the game. We saw this in Warlords of Draenor with the Legendary Ring, we saw this with the Legendary Vendor in Legion, and in the case of Battle for Azeroth, we're going to see these ongoing upgrades to the Legendary Cloak, which is going to let us wear more corrupted gear with fewer penalties over time. Small stat boosts for the Heart of Azeroth are coming past level 80, and eventually you'll be able to buy items to socket your gear. That's kind of like the cherry on top. There are a few areas that Blizzard has stubbornly held their ground on, which is, kind of pissed a lot of players off. Account-bound essences are still not going to be a thing, but the requirements have been relaxed over time. But to sum things up, there is a lot to do in this patch. A lot of cool mechanics to play with, and of course, cosmetics to farm for that will take us well beyond the future stat squishes and rating resets that come with every new expansion. They might be fun and rewarding, but they might not be. It just depends on what you like. My favorite thing about this patch is easily going to be Horrific Visions. The challenge is what I hope to be the most entertained by after the raids are run and we settle into that whole wait and see posture that comes at the end of an expansion. My biggest disappointment is probably the requirements of essences that are still a little bit too high, but this isn't nearly as punishing as Legion's legendary gear. To conclude, I'm not going to lie and say that 8.3 is going to be the greatest patch ever and that everyone should be playing it, but I feel that there is compelling content worth farming for, and that this content is worth being present to experience while it's still relevant. And that's going to be it for me. Like the video, share your thoughts, and stay breezy.